He was born into a country that told him, from birth, exactly what he wasn't allowed to become. He wanted to fly fighter jets. The Air Force gave him a desk instead. He wanted Hollywood to notice him. Hollywood made him wait 30 years. By the time most actors are winding down, Morgan Freeman was just getting started. His first Oscar nomination didn't come until he was 50 years old. Today, his voice narrates documentaries, sells encyclopedias, and has been described, only half-jokingly, as sounding like God himself. He's 89, he's still working, and the story of how he got here is less a fairy tale and more a masterclass in patience most of us don't have the stomach for. This is Becoming Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman was born on June 1, 1937, in Memphis, Tennessee, the youngest of 5 children. His father, Morgan Sr., worked as a barber. His mother, Mamie, was a schoolteacher. Like millions of black families across the segregated South, the Freemans were caught in the currents of the Great Migration. His parents relocated to Chicago in search of factory work, while young Morgan was sent to live with his grandmother in Charleston, Mississippi. It's in Mississippi that Freeman's earliest memories take shape. A childhood split between the rural South and the urban North, between his grandmother's house and his parents' apartment, all of it unfolding under Jim Crow segregation. He drifted between Charleston, Greenwood, Gary, Indiana, and Chicago throughout his childhood, never quite settling in one place. He made his acting debut at 9 years old, playing the lead in a school play. But the moment that actually set his path in motion happened 3 years later, and it wasn't planned at all. At 12, there was a girl in his class named Barbara, the class princess, as he'd later describe her. Trying to get her attention, young Morgan pulled a chair out from under her. He got the reaction he wanted, and then some. His teacher grabbed him by the collar and marched him down the hall, certain he was about to be expelled. Instead, the teacher flung open a door and asked if he'd ever done any acting. Under the circumstances, he said yes without hesitation. It turned out the school was short a cast member for a statewide drama tournament. Freeman was handed a role as the younger brother in a play about a wounded soldier returning home from war. He won, not just the local round, the whole competition. A punishment for misbehaving in class had just handed a 12-year-old his first taste of what it felt like to be good at something in front of an audience. It would be years before he understood what that moment actually was. Despite winning that drama competition, acting wasn't the dream Freeman carried into adulthood. Flying was. He'd grown up devouring Hollywood's war movies, pilots, heroism, the romance of combat in the skies. By the time he graduated high school in Greenwood, Mississippi, in 1955, he had exactly one ambition: to become a fighter pilot. He was offered a partial drama scholarship to Jackson State University. He turned it down. Instead, he enlisted in the United States Air Force, following 3 of his 4 brothers into the military. Reality had other plans. Instead of a cockpit, the Air Force put him behind a radar console, training as an automatic tracking radar repairman, the kind of job that meant sitting at a desk tracking targets on a screen, while his dream of the sky stayed exactly that. For over a year, he waited for his shot at pilot training. When it finally came, when he was allowed to sit in the cockpit of an actual Air Force jet, something didn't click the way he'd imagined. Looking at the switches and dials in front of him, he later said the feeling wasn't excitement. It was the sudden realization that he wasn't in love with flying. He was in love with the idea of flying, the version Hollywood had sold him. After nearly 4 years of service, Freeman left the Air Force in 1959. He didn't go home. He drove straight for Los Angeles. If the Air Force years were about a dream deferred, the next 12 were about a dream ignored. Freeman enrolled at Los Angeles City College, studying theater arts, and took acting classes at the Pasadena Playhouse. He supported himself with a day job as a transcript clerk while chasing auditions in his off hours. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't close. Hollywood, at the time, offered almost nothing for a young black actor without connections, without a reel, without a name. So Freeman moved again, this time to New York, where the theater world at least offered a stage, even if the audiences were small and the pay was smaller. He spent the better part of the 1960s doing exactly the kind of work most actors quietly give up on: off-Broadway productions, understudy roles, television bit parts that came and went without anyone noticing. In 1967, he made his Broadway debut in an all-black production of Hello, Dolly, playing Rudolph. It was a real credit. It was also nowhere near a career. By the end of the decade, Morgan Freeman was in his early 30s, a trained, serious, talented actor, and functionally invisible to the industry he'd given everything to reach. In 1971, Freeman landed the role that would make him recognizable, just not in the way he wanted. He was cast as Easy Reader on The Electric Company, a PBS educational program aimed at kids learning to read. For the next several years, he played the character alongside a rotating cast of others on the show. It paid the bills. It gave him steady, visible work for the first time in over a decade, and it meant almost nothing to his ambitions as a serious dramatic actor. He was in his mid-30s, then his 40s, playing a children's television character while his real goal, feature films, prestige roles, the kind of parts that could define a career, stayed exactly out of reach. Freeman kept working through the 1970s and into the 80s, stage roles, an Obie Award, eventually a Tony nomination for his Broadway work. Critics who paid attention respected him. Hollywood still didn't call. By the mid-1980s, Freeman was approaching 50 years old. Nearly 30 years had passed since he'd driven west toward Los Angeles with an acting dream in the passenger seat. Most people, at that point, would have called it a life spent trying. Freeman kept showing up anyway. In 1987, everything changed at once. Freeman appeared in Street Smart, playing a violent pimp in a role that had almost nothing in common with the warm, wise characters he'd later become known for. It earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. He was 50 years old. What followed wasn't a slow climb, it was an avalanche. Clean and sober. Lean on Me, playing real-life Principal Joe Clark, a role that showcased the commanding authority his voice was uniquely built for. Driving Miss Daisy, in 1989, earned him a second Oscar nomination, this time for Best Actor. Glory, the same year, put him alongside Denzel Washington in a Civil War drama that became a critical landmark. In 7 years, Freeman went from a respected but obscure character actor to one of the most reliable dramatic presences in American film. Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood in 1992, The Shawshank Redemption in 1994, playing Red, a performance that, decades later, would be cited as one of the greatest of his career, and one that earned him yet another Oscar nomination. None of it happened overnight, no matter how it looked from the outside. It happened because a man in his 50s refused to stop auditioning like a man in his 20s. By the mid-1990s, Freeman wasn't just landing roles, he was becoming a genre unto himself. Say 7Un, in 1995, cemented his ability to anchor a dark psychological thriller. Then came the range that few actors of his generation could match, playing the President of the United States in disaster films, a wise mentor in war dramas, and in 2003's Bruce Almighty, God, in a role so perfectly cast that the nickname stuck to him permanently. Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins in 2005 introduced him as Lucius Fox, a role he'd carry through the entire Dark Knight trilogy. That same year, Freeman finally won the Academy Award his entire career had been building toward: Best Supporting Actor for $1 Million Baby, opposite Clint Eastwood and Hilary Swank. 5 years later, Invictus earned him yet another nomination, this time for playing Nelson Mandela. Somewhere in this stretch, his voice itself became a commercial asset separate from his acting, narrating nature documentaries, historical specials, and eventually entire cable series exploring science and religion. Advertisers wanted it. Studios built entire marketing campaigns around it. The voice of God wasn't just a joke about Bruce Almighty anymore. It had become shorthand for authority itself. By the count of industry trackers, Freeman's films have grossed more than $4.3 billion worldwide, placing him among the highest-grossing actors in box office history. Built not on a single franchise, but on 5 decades of consistently showing up. Success didn't insulate Freeman from hardship. In 2007, he and his second wife, Myrna, divorced after decades of marriage. The following year, in 2008, Freeman was in a serious car accident near his home in Charleston, Mississippi, a crash serious enough that reports at the time described it as near-fatal. He survived, but the accident left him with lasting nerve damage in his left hand, which he wore a compression glove to manage for years afterward. He kept working. In 2015, Freeman faced a devastating personal loss when his step-granddaughter, Idina Hines, was killed in New York City. He spoke publicly about the loss with characteristic restraint, saying the world would never know the full extent of her talent. In 2018, Freeman's public image faced a different kind of test. CNN published a report in which multiple women described experiencing or witnessing inappropriate behavior and harassment by Freeman on film sets and at his production company. Freeman initially apologized to anyone who felt uncomfortable or disrespected, then later said he did not assault anyone and that the allegations shouldn't be equated with cases of sexual assault. His attorney formally disputed CNN's reporting and demanded a retraction. CNN stood by its story. No criminal charges were filed, and the matter did not result in a formal industry sanction, though it did cost him at least one brand partnership at the time. None of it ended his career. Freeman has continued working steadily into his late 80s, including a role in 2025's Now You See Me, Now You Don't, nearly 70 years after he first left Mississippi for a life in front of an audience. Today, at 89, Morgan Freeman remains one of the most recognizable and trusted voices in American entertainment, a status built the slowest way possible. 3 decades of being overlooked, followed by nearly 4 more of being impossible to ignore. It's tempting to frame this as a story about talent finally being recognized. But talent was never really the question. Freeman had that at 12 years old, the moment a punishment turned into a statewide drama win. The real story is about endurance. 3 decades of small parts, quiet television work, and auditions that went nowhere, absorbed by a man who kept showing up anyway. He wanted to fly jets. Instead, he found himself grounded behind a radar screen, and it took him almost anywhere else to find out what he was actually built for. It just took Hollywood 50 years to notice. That's the receipt.